Mayor Dent.
Here.
Mr. Maslin.
Here. Thank you. Takes us to items for City Council meeting of July 14th. Mr. Trivett? Or I guess, yeah, council preview. Yes, sir.
Yeah, so for the meeting on Thursday, under new business, we have a budget resolution to recognize some grant revenues, consideration of an existing set of uses allowed for a building here in the city, and then the hazard mitigation plan approval, an update to the MVP contract for the fire station, and approval of the fire station alerting system for the fire station, and then, of course, appointments to boards and commissions.
Good. Excellent. Takes us now to public comment, which is an opportunity for anybody in the audience to come forward and address City Council on anything that's on their mind. Seeing none, we'll close that public comment session and move on to background presentation. And first, we have a presentation regarding the selection of a fire station alerting solutions vendor. Interim Chief Snyder will present. Welcome, sir.
Good morning, Mayor Pons. Good morning. Good afternoon, Mayor Pons and Vice Mayor Denton, City Council. Thank you for the opportunity to get in front of you all and talk about the fire station alerting solution for the new fire station. So just to start off, what is a station alerting? And that is a process of which we encode information that's coming from the 911 center, and we actually decode it at the fire station using various audio and visual notifications. That's how our guys and our girls in the fire station are alerted when they have a call for service. And so early on, when we were talking about building the new fire station, we prioritized a lot of different things. And one of the things that we knew was going to be important was the fire station alerting system. And I would argue that it's one of the top 3 most important things for the new fire station. Of course, the first thing is the men and women that call it home. The second thing are the cancer mitigation strategies that are deployed and integrated into the design of the fire station. And then third is going to be the station alerting platform and solution. And so early on, when we were discussing what this new design for the fire station was going to look like, we knew that fire station alerting was going to be such an important piece of it because of the health and safety of the firefighters who are going to call it home. Traditionally, not just the Williamsburg Fire Department, but fire stations in general have had large dormitory-style living areas and where the men and women would sleep. With the incorporation of this new fire station, we're going to have individualized bunk rooms, which is going to be really important for health and safety and sleep deprivation and those types of things that'll be gender neutral. With that type of design yields us the opportunity to have a fire station alerting system that can be really robust, really leverage the technology of fire station alerting devices, and really give our men and women an opportunity to only be alerted when actually the apparatus they're assigned to has a call, which is going to be really important. And so that's during the design phase, that's why the station alerting was so important. So for any type of fire station alerting system that you can get, there's really 3 big contributing benefits of any type of system. That is, one is going to be the impact of health and safety, which we talked a little bit about, demonstrated positive impact on response times, and that's through a variety of different things, from processing time at our 911 center, which our men and women at the PSAP do a phenomenal job, and then we also have audio and visual technology and devices in the fire station that we'll talk about. And the last are using those devices as well for improved situational awareness. So those are 3 areas that typically a fire department and a fire station and the men and women, and then the community will benefit from a fire station alerting system, or those 3 domains. The one that we will continue to emphasize is the impact on the health and safety of our men and women. Again, so as we talked about the importance of the individualized bunk rooms, we wanted to have a system that had the ability to be able to only notify the folks who are on a specific call type so they could sleep through the night. And one of the things that we're seeing across the country in public safety in general, and specifically in the fire department, are concerns about sleep deprivation, the 24-hour shifts and being up all night. And even had intermittent sleeping and the impacts that that has. And so with this fire station alerting system, and specifically the ability to only identify the folks who need to be up for certain call types, we're trying to address some of that sleep deprivation. We're also trying to address brain fatigue when you're up too long and the impacts that that has. So staff's recommendation is for U.S. Digital Designs to be the vendor who will supply our station alerting solution for the fire station. And I think it's important before we go much further to talk about the methodology and how we got here. Several months ago, we developed a team to evaluate the different alerting options that are out there. Two main basically vendors, really manufacturers, were the ones that we looked at. One was U.S. Digital, one was Mock Alert, which was from Motorola Solutions. And this work group internally and externally included representatives from each operations shift, administration, our IT staff here in the city, and we included our 911 center personnel and representatives to help us make the best choice that we could. We did lots of site visits around different fire stations to actually talk to the firefighters, talk to the administrators to understand the benefits of what they were seeing with the station alerting solutions that they were using, and to also evaluate in person the vendors' products that we were evaluating. And we also did demonstrations, and we did presentation demonstrations with Mock Alert and U.S. Digital. And again, we participated in demonstrations and presentations to evaluate the capabilities and the functionality and the options of all the systems. As we evaluated all these things, we came to U.S. Digital for the reasons that are on your board or on the screen here. Zoned alerting via room remote technology, again, speaks to that point earlier, that we're able to identify only the apparatus who are assigned on specific call types and the personnel assigned to them to get woken up in the middle of the night. Voice alert technology, which we have a couple of audio clips, which you'll see, which is a consistent, calm voice that comes across the radio at all times. So it's going to be impacts that clarity of communication that we're getting from the 911 center. We're going to have the incorporation of the digital displays, which will have address points and a map to allow our folks to understand where they're going. The cardiovascular impact, the ramping tones, the light, instead of a quick loud noise, is going to be escalating over a period of time, and the lights coming on so that we can wake our folks up in a more healthy manner so they can be prepared to respond. The integration of panic buttons. For example, in the gym, there will be a button for help. So if someone is having some chest pain, they can hit a button and it will alert panic button activation in the gym. Or it's going to be a panic button in some of the various exterior aspects of the fire station, say someone's at the door on Armistead Avenue and things like that. So you have situational awareness of where people are in proximity to the fire station to have better situational awareness. And the last thing for U.S. Digital, as we talk to the different fire departments and municipalities that have them, the thing that continued to become very clear to me was the customer service and support. Every single time I talked about the G2 system and the interaction that different municipalities had with U.S. Digital, it was just outstanding customer service and support. Of course, the firefighters, they enjoyed all the audio-visual displays, the actual system itself and how it alerted them. They enjoyed the voice automated technology. But the other thing that was really important was that support that you got, which I think was a really important factor for us as we evaluated. And the other thing that U.S. Digital offers that's a little bit different than other vendors, it's completely customizable. We can go in and change it however we want. We can do that ourselves, or we can contact them and they're able to VPN and jump onto the system and make any changes that we want. That can be from volume controls to how alerting procedures happen. There's an array of different functionalities that we can change, again, to continue to customize it for the men and women of the Williamsburg Fire Department. Again, a zone alerting feature is again, a point of emphasis for this particular design. And as you can see how it lays out in the different bunk rooms, and there'll be a video that kind of talks a little bit about this. This is going to be a significant infrastructure install. This is 184 devices that will be installed in the new fire station and administration. Almost of that 184 will be approximately almost about 99 speakers to ensure that our men and women have the information that they need. It'll be 6 CAD status screens, about 14 LED boards, which you'll see. So a lot of technology will be implemented and integrated into the fire station to ensure our men and women get the information that they need to respond quickly and efficiently to calls. This is a little short snippet of a video that really kind of emphasizes what I'm speaking to, which is the voice alert technology and the improved situational awareness through the messaging board and the countdown timers and those things.
Engine 840. Respond with other units. Traffic collision with extrication. Dowling Way and Highway 8. Map page 132. Respond on tap 6.
Phoenix G2 alerts everyone needed to a call simultaneously, no matter how far apart they may be. Quick, clean, clear. Easy to read lighted message displays further increase the situational awareness of the firefighters as they head toward the apparatus. The combination of message sign information and clear spoken speech give firefighters the information needed to respond quickly and effectively. Clear, precise, spoken information unique to the individual stations is delivered in milliseconds.
And so one of the things to take away from that video is those message boards are obviously in the apparatus bay. As our guys and girls are getting into the apparatus, they can actually continue to make sure they understand what address point they're going to. You saw there was a turnout timer, so you can set that to however you want. It can escalate, it can de-escalate. Typically about 1 minute and 30 seconds is what you're looking for, depending upon time of day, for your men and women to get into the fire truck and actually respond after being alerted. That gives them, again, a visual cue on where they are in terms of their tempo and their pace to get out of the fire station. The other thing about those message boards is they're going to be strategically located throughout the egress areas of the fire station. So as our men and women are coming from the bunk room or the kitchen area, they're going to see these message boards. They can look up as they're walking towards the apparatus, again, to really kind of emphasize and help them make sure they understand that situational awareness and where they're going. This next one talks about a little bit about the health and safety. And the other thing I think is important to emphasize as well in terms of situational awareness is most of your fire station alerting systems now have mobile apps for your phone. So for U.S. Digital, part of their standard contract is 24 licenses or user subscriptions. We've been able to negotiate with them 55 to ensure that we have enough for the current men and women of the Williamsburg Fire Department, also include our leadership with the Williamsburg Volunteer Fire Department, and then also have a little bit of buffer for any staffing for in the future. And that was at no cost that U.S. Digital did with included in our proposed contract. That again, what we found when we talked to, regardless of which platform you went with the firefighters, they loved that mobile app. They enjoyed it, having it on their own personal phones. Even when they're off duty, some folks really want to have an idea of what's going on, again, to see, what's going on in the fire station today, and they're able to turn on notifications, turn off notifications. So again, another opportunity for us to leverage technology and utilizing people's mobile devices so that they're getting that information. And the information comes across as, of course, the incident type and the location, and any information is associated with it. So again, even on their mobile phones, it's populating on a GIS map exactly where the call type is, which is extremely important.
Alerts will appear in the station common areas, dorm rooms, and on mobile devices equipped with the Phoenix G2 Fire Station Alerting System app. Your staff hears the dispatch data loud and clear every time with our visual and audio alert systems, featuring easy-to-understand automated voice alerts that are never distorted, always in a calm, consistent voice that never changes. The Phoenix G2 Fire Station Alerting System was designed with the health and cardiac wellness of first responders in mind. Using ramping tones that gradually increase in volume and intensity, the Phoenix G2 system features zoned alerting to the rooms of relevant personnel without disturbing ones that are inactive or sleeping, resulting in a more rested, more relaxed, more aware, and more responsive team.
Just to give you an understanding of the number of Virginia fire departments who are currently utilizing U.S. Digital, we just put them on the board so that you can have an idea of the scope of the customer list that is currently utilizing U.S. Digital designs for their station alerting platform. We've spoken to many of these folks. We've visited some of these fire stations, talked to the firefighters and the leadership, and we continue to reiterate and basically confirm what we've heard and what we've kind of deemed from our own evaluations on the quality of the product and the experience that the municipalities and the firefighters are having with this system being implemented into their fire stations. Next is the financial piece. So the actual U.S. Digital cost is going to be $274,117.63. As you can see, that includes the equipment, an 18-month warranty, the installation, the training, and some of that training incorporates our 911 center to ensure that the dispatchers understand how to use the software, and working with the 911 center's leadership for the implementation with that. There will be some operational impact to the 911 center in terms of how they'll dispatch specifically, pushing the information across. So there will be a purchase of 6 additional monitors working with the leadership of the 911 center that they would need in order to really integrate our station alerting system into their operations. There's a CAD interface, which is about $75,000. That number is derived from Chesterfield County, who also has a Motorola CAD, and they use US Digital. And when they went to the US Digital platform several years ago, it was about a $75,000 interface. And since we have very comparable systems, that's what the CAD interface we're projecting to cost. Then the radio equipment. And it's important to note for the radio equipment that regardless of which platform we were to go with, we were going to have radio equipment expenses that we would have to integrate into the actual solution. So you can see that's $69,245.85. And that's for some consoles inside the fire station to get us the voice from the US Digital, and it's also some consulates throughout the fire station so that men and women can pick up a radio and actually utilize that instead of their portable radio. So right now that's 4 consulates and 2 consoles that would be integrated into the fire station that would be a part of this package. Again, we would have to spend that money regardless of which alerting solution that we would choose. The annual maintenance and repair for service for US Digital is $14,000. That includes both the equipment that'll be at the 911 center and the equipment that's at the fire station itself. And then the leadership at the 911 center has given us an idea of about $8,000 for the interface annually. So at a minimum, it's going to be $22,000 a year for the reoccurring costs for US Digital. PC upgrades every 5 years, which would be about $12,000 that we would work with our IT and 911 center. CAD upgrade every 2 to 3 years. That's the range. Then the firewall and network security about every 5 years. And Mark Barham and I have spoken about that, and we just recently updated our firewall for the city, so we don't expect that expense to need to be incurred within the next 5 years, and potentially that expense will not need to be incurred at all. So the overall turnkey implementation, we are budgeting about $440,000 is what we're expecting for that turnkey implementation to cost. And then the annual recurring cost is $30,000. And you'll note that I told you it was $22,000, and that was based upon that $14,000 that we know that we'll have every year for the service and warranty, and then the $8,000 for the CAD interface. And that additional $8,000 will be spread over the next couple of years as we look for the PC upgrades and any type of CAD update as well. So that's why you see that $30,000 as opposed to the $22,000 that we know it will cost every year. Really, the last slide is just why do we choose US Digital? And at the end of the day, with the criteria and the demonstrated history that US Digital has in terms of best performance, value, and reliability, we're recommending US Digital Designs to provide our station alerting solution for the fire station for all the things we've already discussed in this presentation, from performance, value, reliability, and customer service, and the research that as an internal team, including all the stakeholders we identified, have determined this is the best solution for the Williamsburg Fire Department. And having said that, I'll be glad to answer any questions to the best of my ability. I know that you guys are aware we don't have any representatives from US Digital here today. They will be here on Thursday at the business meeting, so I'll do my best to answer any questions that you have, and if not, we may have to defer those for technical on Thursday.
Chief, thank you for the presentation. For me, it's really exciting to see that we're engaged in this process as we evolve into this new fire station. I think it stands to reason that all of us and those in the community want to make sure that our firefighters, men and women, have this advanced technology. And one of the things that was always resonated with me was waking up folks that needed to be woken up rather than the whole station and just the piece that provided. But I also appreciate hearing more about just the technology and how it's integrated into mobile apps and throughout the station, and having the staff be able to see things as they're walking towards their apparatus, being so that they're being made aware of what they're getting into before they arrive to the scene. I suspect maybe some of that could be true with other technologies, but the fact that you all at the station have done your investigation and have chosen this, I think, to me, seals the deal. I mean, you're the expert at it, so I appreciate that. So I don't have any questions. I may have some for the folks that come Thursday, but thank you for the presentation. Vice Mayor?
Thank you, Larry. A couple questions. You touched on it in your presentation, the impacts on PSAP.
Yes, sir.
That if this was approved, Williamsburg be the only locality involved in a regional PSAP that has this system. Is that something that U.S. Digital has to train dispatchers, or is that something that comes from the leadership of the PSAP?
That's a great question, Chief. It's going to be, U.S. Digital will have representatives on site to work with our 911 center leadership to make sure that they get everything that they need in terms of the training. And so I don't have an approximation of how long that is, how many days that is, but U.S. Digital will be leading that training for our 911 dispatchers.
And then with the CAD interface and some of the other items you listed, the computer monitors, those are costs that would not be incurred if we went with the other system, is that correct?
That is a correct statement, yes, sir.
So based on all of those other costs, it still comes in, the system still comes in less expensive than the mock alerting system?
Yes, sir, and I'll speak to that. So we had a range of magnitude from mock alert. It's $504,000, and that was just on a basic price on kind of what we had talked about. So if we were to go down the mock alert route and talk more with them and talk about the devices and the capabilities and everything we look for, I would expect that number to be higher than 504. But you're exactly right. The turnkey solution that we're presenting to council is about $60,000 less than what the competitor would be.
Yeah, I think that's important for the
Absolutely.
citizens to know, because there's a lot of numbers in there, but when you add it all up at the end of the day, is it still less expensive than the alternative? And then when you talked about customer service and support and all the other localities that you visited, so they had great customer service and support. Do they have people locally?
No, they use, so HoneyMac is the installer for the U.S. Digital system. They're located out of Chesterfield County in Richmond. Most vendors or most municipalities are utilizing them for their after hours or for their contract. There is an option for us to do internal, where you can send folks to Arizona so they can learn how to switch out some of the speakers and those types of things. But most of the folks who we spoke to have just utilized that HoneyMac system to do all the repair and maintenance and have not heard one negative comment or a negative experience with them.
Sure, I think that's all I have for right now.
Okay, thank you. Yes, sir.
Thanks, Chief. So yeah, this seems like a great program, starting with the design, having individual bunk rooms, and then having this alerting system, which I wish we had when I was in the fire department.
Right. As do I.
More sleep then. Talk about during the day, we're still toning the whole station.
Yes, sir.
And as we get into the night portion, where the firefighters and medics are going to their bunk rooms at different times, how does that transition in terms of when do we stop?
Sure, it's a great question. That goes back to that piece of being able to customize it. So it's that day-night switch, which we've kind of always had, or most stations have had any type of klaxon have had. But for us, we can go in there, Mr. Maslin, and we can actually program it when it does that. If we wanted to do it at 6 o'clock, if we wanted to do it at 7 o'clock, whatever that time frame works. And you could really almost do it per shift. They say, hey, we want it at 9 o'clock, we can do that. If that's what the guidance for the guys and the men and women in the department are. So that's how it worked. We can customize it, and it will be based upon the time frame that we want, and that's when that switch over from that room remote technology will alert in terms of the whole station alerting.
Now, let's say somebody wants to work out later and it's not going to the bunk room. How would they be alerted if we're in the night mode?
So that's a great question. So even in the night mode, there's still going to be different audio and visual things that's going to be within the fire station itself. So in some of the common areas, so in the corridor around the bunk rooms, obviously you're not going to have the alerting coming out on the speakers on those. It'll only be in the bunk rooms. But in other areas of the station, we're going to be able to program exactly to your point. How do we want that to look? If we do have somebody who's working out at 10 o'clock, how do we make sure that that person's alerted? And we can build that into the program at the station. So the gym per se, or different areas that we think people may want to be in later or after hours, we can ensure that that area is activated. So again, one of the great things about US Digital is that customization, where we can do exactly what you're referring to.
Yeah, well, thanks. Now, talking about the mobile devices, that was one of my questions.
Yep.
That's good. So when I was in the fire service, the paramedics had pagers, so it was one-way communication.
Right.
So with this alerting in the mobile devices, the iPhones, is there any way that the medic can actually respond back to dispatch when
It's
they get the
currently
alert?
not set up that way, no, sir. It's only a one-way communication. They won't have anything to go back into the dispatch, no, sir.
Okay. So the public should know that we actually contract with York County
That's correct.
911
Yes,
Center
sir.
for Dispatch. Have they had any comments on this particular system and the manufacturer?
They have been. They have been heavily involved in our evaluation criteria. They were a part of our team that went and looked at the various places for the different stations. And so we have consulted with them to understand the impacts, as Vice Mayor Dent was talking about, to really appreciate what this decision for the city of Williamsburg is going to be on them. So they are supportive. They obviously, the mock alert system is a Motorola solution, so it integrates better in terms of their technology, but they also are very supportive of whatever decision they've made, and that's the commitment they've had, is once we made a decision, they were looking forward to implementing it.
So several years ago, during the budget discussion, several of us pushed for the mobile data terminals.
Yeah.
Getting those
Yes,
back
sir.
in the budget after they'd been cut from the fire department budget. The messaging that we see in the video in terms of at the station, and the advantage of the mobile data terminals was getting information to the apparatus as they're responding, address, conditions, and it was really helpful in COVID.
Sure.
Hazmat information, maybe nearest fire hydrant, GPS.
Yep.
Is the messaging that we're seeing in the station, is that the same messaging going to the MDT, or is it different?
So it's going to be, there's two parts to the answer to your question. One, it all depends on which screen we're looking at. So in this fire station, we're planning to program 6 CAD status screens, which are going to be very similar to the status screens that you're referring to in our MDTs. Within those screens, we will be able to have the ability to have a little bit of notes in the things that the dispatcher is taking down so that the guys and girls can see it. There will be other screens within the station that will not be directly linked to the CAD, but they will be linked to the fire station alerting system. For example, if the guys and girls are watching a football game on Saturday and they're in the living room and a call comes in, the football game will pause, it'll go away, and the call type will come up on that screen, and it will delay for about 30 seconds to say, this is the call type, here's a map of where it's at, so that they can go. They won't have access to the additional information that we're used to in an MDT for the screens that'll be displaying the fire station alerting through US Digital. So the answer is yes, on particular screens they will, depending upon how the CAD feed is and how they're linked in.
And can you, in terms of the construction, can you talk about how the construction contract was negotiated and the design that sort of anticipated the rough-in requirements to support this, so
Right.
that it's not a change order from the contractor?
Yeah, so we were lucky. It's a great question. So we were lucky early on when we were starting to look at the fire station alerting solutions to include some of the schematics and designs of fire station alertings early into the program in the fire station, almost at the 60% construction drawing process. And so there were several different owner-supplied needs for the fire station that we obviously have to provide. Station alerting's one, exhaust capture systems another, some IT components, and all those things as we were going through the design process and the construction documents, we were providing the design build team that information. So specifically for fire station alerting, they had the schematics of what we're looking for with only a few tweaks. So that was incorporated when they did their GMP for the comprehensive agreement in consultation with all the trades who would have to help to ensure that the rough-in was in place in their GMP price based upon the design that we provided.
Thanks, Chief.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I think that Vice Mayor Dent and Mr. Maslin have asked questions that I had in my mind, particularly on the cost. I think it's important for the public to know where this one's system stands in relationship to the other one that was under consideration. It's also nice to hear about the detailed customization that will be involved so that you can have audio and visual in all different areas. And it sounds like you all will be able to make those changes very, very easily and quickly.
Yes, ma'am.
So I have no other questions and glad to see this moving forward.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Chief. I know you all have been doing a lot of thinking on which of the options to go with. I think even there's been some travel around that, and then obviously a lot of communication with a significant portion of other stations, even in the Commonwealth, that use this system. So it certainly seems like U.S. Digital Design is the best option. I had a couple of clarifying questions for you based around the alert system.
Sure.
The first is, you mentioned panic buttons on the exterior of the fire station. I know right now our police station currently has a phone that you can, on the exterior of their HQ, pick up. It'll auto dial 911. I have once made a mistake before of picking that up, thinking it would go to the front desk for a ride along with our police department, and it dialed 911. I said, sorry, this is my mistake. Whoops. So my point is, with the exterior panic buttons, I understand the interior ones, those in the gym or kitchen or restroom, whatever you might need.
Right.
But for those on the exterior, are there any protections around misuse of the buttons or accidental calls?
No, we've talked about that and talking to the other folks of the other departments you've had, that they haven't had any of those nuisance type activations. Because one of the other benefits for the panic buttons is specifically the ones who are located more in the exterior of the stations. It's also for our guys and girls, if they get a call, if they have somebody who walks up, they can say, they can push and say, hey, I have an emergency on bay door number 6, and it may be a walker with somebody with chest pain. So it's also for an internal uses as well, Mr. Rogers, in terms not just for the public. But we've had no demonstrated experience or history with those buttons being misused or maliciously used or falsely.
Okay, good to know that the trend has not been there.
No, it has not.
My second was, the demonstration by video showed a number of individual dorms that people might use, and the alert system that went in for theirs. As I understand, ours will be a gender-neutral bunk system.
That's correct.
How will we specialize which rooms get alerted so that others who might not be on duty that evening would also be made aware of an event?
Yep. So just to make sure I'm clear, you want to understand that the folks who are staying within that room, how they're going to know what particular call type they're going to go on upon the apparatus?
No, more how the people who are staying at that time won't be woken up if they are not one of the ones who are meant to respond.
Yeah, it was going to be, part of that's going to be soundproofing between the walls. So just the normal construction for each individual dormitory is going to ensure that we don't have that transfer of noise and sound. And again, with the ramping tones, you're not going to have as large of a noise that you're trying to keep within a certain area. So I think the building construction and what we're putting in place for the dormitory area specifically, and really the volume of the speaker controls and how it escalates is going to be able to help ensure that other folks who may be even sleeping next door to someone is not disturbed or not woken up. And for the stations who we visited who have that technology, none of them have expressed any issues in terms of the dorm, the actual room being activated. Now, what we have seen that we need to be careful of is some of the departments have got the hallways, the common areas at night activating. So if you have a speaker that's outside your door that goes off and you've assigned yourself to the engine, but the tower is going on a call, they have found where there's bleed over from that. So we have to be very ensure that when we customize that speaker activation, that it's for the specific dorms, and that the hallway areas are not going to impact any audio concerns for the person sleeping.
Okay.
And also, I think, if I understood, part of your question was, because we're rotating people in and out of bunk rooms, how do they tell the system what apparatus they're on?
Right.
So when you go in, at least with US Digital, there's a touch screen, and you'll have a selection. I'm on engine 10, so you hit engine 10, and that'll set the bunk room for that period of time to engine 10.
Okay.
And so all the engine 10 alerts will come to that room, versus the next day, maybe the guy's on medic 10, and he just pushed that button, it would switch it over.
Okay, that's what I was curious. So there's a customization that goes in that's fluid.
Absolutely. And,
Okay.
as you know, we cross-staff Tower 10 and Medic 20. So if you're on that shift or you're on that assignment, you can put the Tower 10 and Medic 20. So whichever one gets a call, you're going to be responding to as well, which I think is important.
And there are those members of our staff that like to hear all the alerts,
Yep.
and they'll have that option also. So they won't be excluded from hearing everything if that's what they'd like to do.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. Some of the captains have said, well, Chief, I want to know when my men and women are going out, which is great. We'll just select them all, and you'll hear every single call that goes through, and, that's your personal choice. But that console that Mr. Trivets was speaking to really gives you the opportunity to have that isolation of the dorms, and then all the other things we talked about in terms of sound control and customization.
Great. Well, very much smart tech then. Thank you, Chief, for the presentation.
You're welcome.
No
Thank you
questions
all.
from me.
Appreciate it.
Chief?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, and this may meet you or Mr. Trivett, but it reminded me when you talked about there were certain things that the city was responsible for and not the contractor. Can you remind us the funding for the alerting system is incorporated in the total cost?
Yeah, this is part of the overall budget.
Okay. I just want to remind everyone that it's not an additional cost. It was incorporated in the overall project cost.
Sir.
So just a follow-up question to Councilmember Rogers about the staff member having to put in, I'm on engine 10 or whatever it is. What if they put in the wrong one and they miss the call for engine 10? I mean, is there a redundancy part of this that management can make sure the right people are plugged into the right places?
Sure. The question that we typically get, Mayor Pons, is what happens if they don't select anything? And so what happens if they don't get any calls? And it defaults. If there is nothing selected on that console, then that room will be dispatched and alerted for every call type. In terms of if you hit the wrong one and you're on medic, that would be a behavior that we would have to address, and we would ensure that gets addressed.
Probably
Luckily,
going to have an uncomfortable conversation with your captain.
but luckily, if that were to happen, you're going to have a partner at least. If you're on the medic, you're going to have somebody else who's going to say, hey, Larry, we got to go, or vice versa. So if that happens and we select the wrong ones, we'll deal with that on a case-by-case basis. But I think that our men and women are going to be so excited about this technology that if they do, it's going to be because of excitement that they forgot to hit it.
Right. Well, I'm excited for you, so thank you.
Thank you.
I'm also excited for the next agenda item. The attorney's always geared up for this once a year. She's got 39 pages to talk about the 22 legislative summary. Ms. Shelton.
All right, well, I'm going to give my usual disclaimer. I'm not a PowerPoint guru, so these are not nearly as interesting as the last ones. This is also not intended to be exhausted. It's just to give council an overview, a sense of what was going on at the General Assembly, things that you need to be aware of, and things that you'll see again. First, before I start my PowerPoint, I did want to note, and I know that you all know this already, Senate Bill 438, which was the bill that we asked Senator Norman and Senator Mason for to restructure the maintenance of effort money to the Historic Triangle Recreational Facilities Authority, in large part, did pass, and so that is now codified into law. I wanted to start this presentation with marijuana. We spent a long time talking about this at the presentation last year. Senate Bill 1406 created a regulatory framework for the sale of recreational marijuana, amongst many other things. However, the provisions regarding the sale of recreational marijuana contained a reenactment clause, which required the General Assembly to pass the bill a second time in this session before the bill became law. The General Assembly did not do that this year, and so all of those regulatory provisions with respect to how the state goes about allowing the sale of recreational marijuana, the rules pertaining to the Cannabis Authority that was created, the taxing structure for states and localities for the recreational sale, and the referendum component regarding our zoning issues were not reenacted and will not go into effect as provided for last year. So currently what's still authorized is the use of medical marijuana and the possession of small amounts of marijuana, 1 ounce or less, and the possession of not more than 4 marijuana plants per household. That continues to be the law. Those did not require reenactment. I understand they plan to take this up next year, so we may get something completely different or something very similar. I also wanted to touch on our experience with COVID and bring this to your attention. So as we were going through the pandemic, we had a lot of executive orders that were adopted by the governor that gave us sort of the framework for how we deal with COVID In this session, the General Assembly limited the ability of the governor to declare disaster to 30 days, and that can be renewed for an additional 30 days. If the General Assembly doesn't take any action to either approve or pass into law what the governor has proposed in the executive order, then the governor can renew for an additional 30 days. But after that, it can't be extended unless the General Assembly approves that extension. So that does not affect the city's local declaration of emergency. This just affects the governor's declaration of emergency. But it means that the next time we have this sort of situation, and I certainly hope we don't anytime soon, but if we do, then we're going to see something very different coming out of Richmond. I wanted to touch on FOIA. They considered this year House Bill 444, which they passed, to allow electronic meetings, so virtual meetings of the entire city council, very much like the ones we held during COVID. But when they passed this, eventually they took out the ability for local governing bodies, local school boards, planning commission, ARBs, and BZAs to utilize this provision. So right now, the only board of the city of Williamsburg that can use this is the EDA. The FOIA Council is supposed to be looking at this issue, so hopefully next year they will feel a higher degree of comfort with our ability to effectively implement that practice, since we have, and then if we are eventually allowed to do it, much like your individual electronic participation in meetings, there is a limit on the number of times that you can do that per year. We are also now required to post meeting minutes on the city's official website within 7 working days after final approval of the minutes. As a practical matter, we already do this when the agendas are posted. And so we do that now, but now it's required by law. We also have had some situations where, because our newspaper office for purposes of sending notice is now located in Chicago, we've had more issues of late than we had when we had a local Virginia Gazette office with ensuring the accuracy of the notices and the timely advertisement of those notices within the paper. This is a savings clause. So basically it says if we have submitted our ad to the paper and the newspaper fails to publish the notice or publishes it incorrectly, then the law deems the locality has met its notice requirement, because all of our notices have time frames associated with them, so long as the notice is published correctly in the next available edition of a newspaper having general circulation in the locality. So we do it the right way first. The newspaper messes up. We read it and make sure it's correct, and if it's not correct, we contact the newspaper and make sure it's in the next edition of the Gazette. And so then we've met our timelines for purposes of the law.
Chris, question on that. So do we simultaneously post it in the municipal building and or on our website?
We post it on our website. We don't post it at the municipal building.
So we've got hopefully an accurate one on our website.
The notice is required to be posted in the newspaper.
Right.
But just to build on that, my question was going to be, do you know of any conversation about allowing for other media sources than just newspapers?
That is an ongoing conversation. It has not yet resulted in a bill. That has passed, let's put it that way. Thank you. House Bill 307 requires that public bodies subject to FOIA shall make all reasonable efforts to supply records at the lowest possible cost. Now, the previous standard was the actual cost. So in addition to the actual cost, we now have to provide the records at the lowest actual cost that we can within reason. So there are times when the records are, for example, if I'm doing there's a request for your emails, the only staff member that handles that is me, and so that search would be billed at my hourly rate. But for most things that we do, it's an administrative rate, not a city attorney rate. So we are required to attempt to give those records at the lowest possible cost. And we are now required to, when someone makes a request, we have to then respond to that request in writing with a notice that the public body can make reasonable charges for the requested information, and that the individual has the right to ask for an estimate. And then we have to create a process by which they can ask for that estimate. So that's added an additional layer of technicality to responding to FOIA requests. So we get the request, and we usually, if it's not a minor request or it's not, or we know it's going to be really onerous, we go ahead and search for the records, which we are required to do if the cost is less than $200. Now we have this additional step of notifying the individual specifically when they make a request that they have the right to ask for an estimate and what that is. But the good news is it tolls the 5-day response period until we receive a response back and are able to give them that estimate, and then they decide whether they want to move forward.
Chris, so if the person decides in their mind it's not the lowest possible cost, then who decides it's not the low, it is or isn't the lowest?
Well, there's a mandamus action that they can take to the general district court to argue about the cost. But we're going to give it to them through whoever is the person who's able to search it at the lowest hourly rate. So actual cost is the hourly rate of the person doing the search times the amount of time it takes to do the search. And most of our FOIA requests, with the exception, I think, of the police department, are not very onerous, and they don't take a lot of time at all to respond to. And so those are 5 or 10 minutes, and we don't normally charge for those.
Chris, so in one of the other cities I worked for, we would get a lot of requests, and some of those could be quite extensive, and sometimes the person would never even pick them up. Do you see any of that?
Every once in a while we have that happen, not often. What happens more often is someone makes a request and it's fairly extensive and they get a bill of $50 or $60 and then they don't pay for the bill. And there's really not much that we can do about that other than if they ask for a subsequent set of documents under FOIA, we can tell them no until they've paid for their previous FOIA request. And the final FOIA bill, I think, if I'm remembering correctly, last year the General Assembly amended the criminal investigative records provision. For years and years and years, we were not required to provide criminal investigative records. So police records are divided into 2 parts. The criminal incident information, which we're always required to provide, which gives basic details of what it was that we responded to, what type of crime, where it was located, the name of the responding officer. And then everything else, the report, any photographs that were taken, any witness statements, are deemed investigative records. And it was at the discretion of the chief of police whether or not we provided those records. Last year that was changed, so we were required to provide criminal investigative records for any case that was not ongoing. So ongoing meant the prosecution of the crime is in progress, or the appeals haven't run, or that case touches on 3 other cases, and if we release that information, it might have a detrimental impact to other ongoing cases. But eventually cases become not ongoing because everything that needs to happen has happened. So that stayed in effect for a year, and now the code has again been changed so that criminal investigative records, which are not ongoing, so ongoing records we don't have to provide, are subject to mandatory release, but only for a limited group of individuals and under very specific circumstances. So the victim of a crime is entitled to the report. An attorney who is representing an individual in a habeas corpus action or an actual innocence action is entitled to the report. And there are a whole list of them, but generally along those lines. And those are mandatory releases. Otherwise, they have gone back to being a discretionary release. There are numerous exceptions, though, to that regarding information that has to be redacted, whether or not a court order has to be obtained before the information can be provided, whether the information can be mailed to the individual, or whether they have to come into the department. And it's all very complex, and I've already done training with the police department to walk them through the process. They have added a provision to this that if we release investigative records, we are now required to notify the victim or the family of a victim or the parent of a victim with not less than 14 days of notice prior to the release of the record. So we are not now subject to that 5-day response period for these records. We have to send a notice to the victim. So what it doesn't say is victims move, they address changes, we have the address provided in the report. And so it's not clear what we do if we attempt to notify the victim and we send a letter to the victim or someone in that category of people to say, we've gotten a request for these records, you have the right to file for injunctive relief to prevent the release of these records, and the notice comes back not found. So I think we have to make the effort because the law requires it to, but we understand we're not going to have current information for everybody. So I'm going to move on to taxation. House Bill 200. We actually had this situation, and I suspect it was because of the situation that we had that this is now in the law. There are two types of tax exemptions for real property in Virginia and personal property in Virginia. There's tax exemption by classification, which is the entities or types of entities that are listed in the Code of Virginia as getting a tax exemption. And then there's tax exemption by designation, which is a tax exemption category that City Council grants. In that latter category, there was a provision and is a provision in the Code of Virginia that allows that exemption to extend to a wholly owned LLC. So the only member of the LLC is the nonprofit. So if the nonprofit transfers their real property or their personal property to a wholly owned LLC, they get to take advantage of the tax exemption. We had a situation here where the tax exemption was by classification, and that language did not extend to tax exemptions by classification. And so I was not able to say that's okay, because tax law is strictly construed. If it's not in the Code of Virginia, it doesn't exist. So now it's in the Code of Virginia that privilege is also now afforded to tax exemptions by classification. So have I confused you? Did you follow that? That was interesting to me because we had that situation last year. House Bill 267 grants localities permissive authority to return surplus personal property tax revenues to taxpayers. We previously only had that authority for real property tax revenues. House Bill 298 allows the locality to create a land bank entity or to designate a nonprofit entity to be essentially the land bank entity. And then it creates a new process for dealing with derelict buildings also having delinquent taxes and liens exceeding 25% of the assessed value. So if we have a delinquent real property that also has a derelict structure on it, we can go through a special commissioner and have the special commissioner transfer that property to the land bank entity or to the locality instead of having the property sold at public auction on the courthouse steps. In that instance, the special commissioner needs to determine what the value of the property is, and then any amounts remaining in excess after any unpaid taxes or liens are paid, the value of them are assigned, then the tax exempt entity or the land bank or the locality would need to pay that to the owner.
What is deemed derelict is in the building code.
Yes.
And investigation of sorts.
Yes. And the special commissioner takes evidence of that as well as the value. So it's a special commissioner's hearing as opposed to a court hearing. House Bill 368 increases from $5,000 to $10,000 the maximum amount that the locality can authorize the treasurer to refund taxes as a result of an erroneous tax assessment. That's without additional action by City Council. House Bill 518, this started off as a bill that would have accommodation intermediaries, so the Travelocities and Expedias that sell hotel rooms for a fee, paying their fees in addition to the taxes straight to the Commonwealth of Virginia, and then the Commonwealth of Virginia would designate which localities those go to and pay the locality. That's not what we ended up having. The major provision of this now is that it allows for one accommodation intermediary to agree to pay the tax for another accommodation intermediary by agreement, so long as they have registered with the state and then with the locality as a dealer for purposes of remitting the tax. I'm not sure how this is going to work as a practical matter, and the Department of Taxation is required to publish guidelines on how that's to be implemented by August the 1st. So we'll have more information about this very shortly.
So we're talking about rooms tax that we have imposed locally. It's not that these Travelocities of the world, the intermediaries, remit those collected tax dollars to the hotel for submission to the...
They are required to collect tax for the hotel and for any fees that they charge. So the full value of what the customer is paying, regardless of how that's assigned, either the $50 to the hotel and the $20 to Expedia, or all $70. If it's sold through Expedia, they're required to pay the tax.
But I thought the Expedia would send that money to the hotel, and then the hotel would remit that tax. But I guess it's fees, I mean, because I'm confused as to what part would Travelocity or the like would send to the state to have it come back to them.
If they are collecting the remittance, they're required to send the tax, as I understand the bill. But I'll give you more details of that.
Yeah.
I'll go back and check. House Bill 693 requires the Commissioner of Revenue to rely on registration information as to whether or not a vehicle qualifies for tax relief. So now, if you are a person who is entitled to an exemption for personal property tax on your vehicle, you are to provide that with an application to register your vehicle with the DMV. The Commissioner of the Revenue, who's already looking at the DMV record, should obtain that information from the DMV, unless the department's information is incorrect or incomplete. So it's going to change the process. Instead of coming to the locality and requesting the tax exemption, there's a form they should fill out with the DMV, so it's on their registration information. House Bill 911 authorizes localities by ordinance to provide a credit against taxes and fees imposed by the locality to an individual who provides approved volunteer services in the locality. And that includes volunteer first responders or any individual who performs volunteer service for a nonprofit in the locality. The bill, however, excludes personal property tax and real property tax, but otherwise gives localities the discretion to determine which, if any, taxes or fees are permissible uses for the credit and what kind of service qualifies for the credit. So a fair amount of discretion absent those two taxes.
Chris, so I think I'm curious as to why not personal property, because you would think vehicles are being used for this, and
it
that
specifically
can't be part of it.
excludes them.
The other thing is administratively, since we have a lot of volunteers may not even live in the city of Williamsburg, may not own a house and would not be able to get a real estate credit. Is there any talk, maybe Drew, on a regional basis of the jurisdictions getting together and having a regional plan using this?
So far, no, sir.
Okay. Thank you.
House Bill 957, and I have to say I'm a little confused by this one. So it allows a locality to declare basically a new classification for real property taxes for the surviving spouse of a member of the armed forces who dies in the line of duty, subject to a couple of exceptions, as a separate class of property, taxed at a different rate than the general class of real property, so at 58 cents instead of 62 cents, so long as the spouse occupies the property and does not remarry. The rate can't be higher than the general rate, and it can't be zero. What is a little confusing about this is we already have a mandated real property exemption, so I'm not entirely sure what the goal of this is intended to achieve, but at the moment, we have a mandated tax exemption for exactly the same class of people.
We voted on that just recently.
It's not been very long. House Bill 1010, this bill started as a requirement for a referendum if your assessments are 101% or more of your prior year assessments. For us, that generally happens every year, and the law required us to provide a notice that assessments are going to be 102% of assessments from last year as part of our notice. The function of this, I mean, this is a function of the market, right? We're required to assess property at at the fair market value of the property. And so eventually this bill morphed into a new notice that we are required to provide if we have a situation where our tax assessments go up by more than 1%. In addition to our normal annual budget advertisement that goes to the Gazette, we have to provide a separate notice that's published on a different day from any notice published for the budget hearing. There is specific language in the bill for what that notice has to say, including the amount of the assessment increased by percentage based on the assessment, the amount by which the tax rate would have to be lowered to offset the increase in assessments, the effective tax rate based on the increase in tax assessments, along with the total amount of the budget. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Most of this we've already provided in our normal general notice. So again, this is one of those situations where the bill morphed into something that we really already do, except we do it in one ad instead of in two.
Anybody wonders why government seems to always be growing, it's these burdens that come down from the state that make it more onerous for us to get information out and so.
And more confusing to the public.
That's right.
A couple of procurements. The value of the property requiring a bid bond when we do Commonwealth-funded transportation projects was increased from $250,000 to $350,000. So all projects that are over $350,000 that are from Commonwealth-funded projects, for us that's a lot, require a bid bond. And now there is a required performance bond and payment bond for all non-transportation related public construction projects in excess of $500,000. Transportation related projects that exceed $350,000 and are funded in whole or in part by the Commonwealth. We already do this. We do this with any construction project that we have, whether it's $500,000 or less or more. There was an eminent domain bill this year that was not great for the localities, Senate Bill 694. Normally, so condemnation laws has for years and years and years provided that there is no allowable damage unless you have a loss of direct vehicular access to a public road as a result of the condemnation. So we move a driveway up because of a sidewalk project that we're doing, and it doesn't prevent someone from getting into the parking lot. There's no compensation for that. We're paying for the access. There's no actual loss of access. It's just been moved. And under previous law, the person didn't lose direct vehicular access, and so there would be no compensation for that. So this year the law was amended to allow for compensation for any change in vehicular or pedestrian access. It still has to result in a diminution of the value of the property. There has to be some lessening of the value of the property as a result. Where this gets into a problem is when we have a construction contract, right? We have a construction project, and like we're going to do on Capitol Landing Road, and we're going to have sidewalks built, and there's going to be some access issues. So we're going to need to be really careful that those don't extend for an extensive period of time. There is a savings clause for closing streets for events and other short-term loss of access claims, which prohibit them for a 7-day period of time. So if we close a street for a parade, or we close a street for a special event, and it's a day-long special event or a 2-day-long special event, there's no claim for that under eminent domain. If it goes on longer than 7 days, there is a potential claim for that under eminent domain now that did not exist before. House Bill 710 requires a locality to take into consideration or give preference to an individual's status as a person with a disability in its hiring policies and practices, provided that person meets all the knowledge, skills, and eligibility requirements for the position. The bill defines a person with a disability as having a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities. So that's the standard under the ADA. Or someone who has a record of such an impairment. But what's interesting is this language was added to Section 15.2, 1509, which is not the Virginia Human Rights Act. It's the section that requires us to give a preference in hiring to veterans. And so By extension of that, I read this as requiring us to give a preference to an individual with a disability so long as they are capable of doing the job with or without a reasonable accommodation.
Chris, what does it mean to require to take into consideration or give preference?
It's not the clearest language, so I think the safest position for the city to take is giving a preference. We aren't allowed to ask this question until well into the hiring process. This is not a question that's asked at initial interview. This is well into the hiring process when we're talking about medical conditions and physicals, right? When we normally require someone to take a physical for the position that they have, and that's generally when this comes up.
A question for Drew. So in looking at this, do we have positions where we're interviewing for positions and there's a scale in terms of points, and would actually, like, giving extra points for a veteran, would that, or for someone with disabilities, would that satisfy that?
That's not something that we do now. No, sir.
Would that help?
It probably would. The problem with the way that this is structured is it is so late in the hiring process before this ever comes up, and we're not allowed to ask the question, right, until it becomes an issue when we're doing physicals. And so the law currently, the federal law requires us not to discriminate on the basis of disability. And if someone can do the job with or without a reasonable accommodation, the fact that they have a disability is not a factor in the hiring decision. If they can do the job, they get the job whether they have a disability or not. This is one step beyond that, and so we've got to really think about how we're going to implement it.
Thank you.
House Bill 1063 adds religion to the Virginia Human Rights Act and prohibits discrimination in public accommodation, employment, and housing. And the bill defines religion as an outward expression of religious faith, including adherence to religious dressing and grooming practices, and the carrying or displaying of religious items or symbols. The language in that definition got bounced around. There was some broader language that was proposed by the governor that was ultimately not accepted, and so this is the language that the bill ended up with. We already have this in our practices. There was one conflicts of interest bill that exempts from the definition of gift tickets and registration or admission fees to an event that are provided by an agency to its officers or employees for the purpose of performing official duties related to their public service. So if you're going to an event that sells a ticket and you're asked to speak, or it's something that you need to know for purposes of your performance as a city council member, the cost of that admission or that ticket or that registration doesn't count as a gift.
Thus doesn't have to be reported on our...
Correct. One zoning bill I wanted to bring your attention to, it provides, I'm sure you remember last year, there was an extension that was given to land use approvals valid and outstanding as of July 1st of 2020 that was granted as a result of the problems with the pandemic. They've granted another extension, so now that lasts through July 1st, 2023. The ones that you had come back to you were approvals that were granted after that deadline. One housing authority bill to bring to your attention, House Bill 616, which removes the requirement that indigent defendants post an appeal bond in an unlawful detainer action from the General District Court. Normally, if we go to court with someone for an eviction action and the housing authority prevails on that, then the tenant, if they want to appeal to the circuit court, has to post an appeal bond. That amount is set by the judge. And then in order to appeal, they have to pay that amount into the circuit court. This removes that requirement for indigent defendants, and receiving federal or state public assistance is a rebuttable presumption of indigence for purposes of this provision, which is going to apply to quite a few of our housing authority residents. So most of the ones that we've had recently have been represented by legal aid and would fall into this category anyway. We would have a few that probably are not considered indigent, but most would be considered for purposes of court. And there's a formula that the court goes through to determine that. House Bill 450 adds prohibition and a civil fine for parking a vehicle that's not capable of receiving an electric charge in a space that's clearly marked as reserved for electric charging vehicles. The fine can't be more than $25. This is an either or, so the state imposes this requirement, or it can be a local requirement in the city code, in which case the fine of $25 would be directed to the city. So if it's in the city code and it's charged under the city code, the $25 fine gets paid to the city as opposed to being paid to the state. So you may want to consider adding this to the city code. For this provision to be effective, a sign has to be posted at each parking space that this impacts, that the space is reserved for electric charging vehicles, and there's a fine of $25 for parking there.
It's enforced by our local parking officers?
Yes.
Okay.
And when you say that a sign has to be posted, is that whether it's because of state?
Either
or-
one.
Either one, okay. So we have to do it regardless.
So we would be responsible to do that in city parking lots or parking lots that we have control of.
So I'm thinking about Kiwanis Park when recently Robbie and Dan posted signs at those charging stations, reserving those for electric charging. We just need to add something about the fine, right?
That's right.
Once we decide we're going to do that.
They also added as a secondary offense, or there was a secondary offense related to having loud exhaust systems that are not in good working order. That has changed from a secondary offense to a primary offense, and localities are now allowed to have an ordinance prohibiting those loud exhaust systems. If it's charged under state law, it's a nonstop offense. As you remember, or may not remember, last year there were a variety of secondary offenses that you can't stop a vehicle for. And the intent of this was to allow the local ordinance to be a primary offense subject to stop. But there's some conflict in the way that the statutes interact with each other. So if you want to do this, my suggestion would be that we add it to the city code as a nonstop offense and ask for the ambiguity to be clarified. House Bill 750 prohibits establishing a formal or informal quota system that requires a law enforcement officer to make a specific number of arrests or issue a specific number of summonses within a designated period of time, and that shall not be the sole criteria in evaluating the officer's performance. Last year, the General Assembly adopted House Bill 5049, which prohibited law enforcement agencies from acquiring certain military property, so surplus property, including a variety of firearms or ammunition of over .50 caliber. And as they defined it, it included the Williamsburg Police Department's 12-gauge shotguns because the slug is more than .50 caliber. There was a waiver process. We went through the waiver process. The House Bill 813 changes the limitation to specify that the .50 caliber relates to rifles and rifle ammunition and not shotgun ammunition, and so no further waiver is required based on any of the firearms held by the police department. There are a couple of school safety bills that I wanted to bring to your attention. House Bill 873 requires a school resource officer to be included as part of a threat assessment team for each school that employs a school resource officer. And for the schools that don't, the chief of police is required to designate a law enforcement officer to receive school safety training by the Virginia Center for Schools and Campus Safety, and requires that officer to then serve as the law enforcement liaison for the school administrator. So there's a category for schools that have resource officers and a category for schools that don't. And then House Bill 1129 requires the school board, each local school board, to collaborate with the chief of law enforcement officer of the locality or his designee when requiring school safety, conducting school safety audits. The superintendent is required to make the audit available to the chief of police. The bill further requires that the walkthrough audit checklist, that's a specific standard that the Center for Schools and Campus Safety provides, has to also be made available to the chief law enforcement officer. So the intent of these two bills is to increase the collaboration between the police departments and the school system. Last year, the Marcus Alert System, or 2 years ago, the Marcus Alert System was established that creates a response protocol for responding to individuals who are in mental health crisis. And there's a variety of steps to go through those protocols, and the City Human Services Department has already started working through those processes. It extends the period of time to have those protocols done from July 1st, 2022 to July 1st, 2023. And it also exempts from requiring the protocols localities with populations under 40,000, which would be us. So now they are voluntary for the smaller jurisdictions. I believe, and Wendy's sitting here, that we're proceeding through those protocols regardless of whether they're voluntary or not. One economic development bill that I wanted to let you know about was House Bill 1194, which authorizes EDAs to make grants associated with the construction of affordable housing. So these can be grants to private developers to assist them with developing projects including affordable housing. So that might be a tool that you might want to consider using in the course of your actions related to that issue. One other bill I wanted to bring your attention to was a gap financing bill that they adopted, House Bill 1308, which provides for the potential use of state sales tax of up to 2% to be used for gap financing for major tourism projects. The project has to meet a deficiency identified in the adoption of a tourism plan approved by the Virginia Tourism Authority, so you have to have a tourism zone for this. The provisions of the bill pertain in different percentages to projects of varying but significant projects. So $100 million investment in new facilities or the creation of 500 jobs. These are not for smaller projects, this is for larger projects. The locality is required to contribute an amount equal to the % state sales tax generated by transactions taking place on the premises. There has to be an ordinance adopted. The funds have to be applied to principal and interest on the gap financing. The owner is required to have at least 70% of their funding of the project in place in order to qualify, and they have to enter into a performance agreement with the EDA or the locality, agree to pay an access fee. So as I'm reading this, it seems the process is the state reimburses the sales tax to the project pays that to the EDA, and the EDA pays the gap financing, principal and interest. So it's a fairly complicated structure, but it's there if we happen to have a large project. And I know with the redevelopment of the visitor center site, that might be something that we keep in mind.
Tool.
There was an IT bill, House Bill 1290, which now requires every public body in Virginia to report to the Virginia Fusion Intelligence Center all known incidents that threaten the security of the Commonwealth's data or communication, or results in exposure of data protected by federal or state law, and all other incidents compromising the security of the public body's information technology systems with the potential to cause disruptions to normal activities. The reports are required to be made within 24 hours of the discovery of the incident, and then the Virginia Fusion Center shares the reports with the Chief Information Officer for the state. But they haven't defined known incidents in the bill, and so it's not clear what would need to be reported based on this. So I expect some clarification will come down in the next year or two. We are now required to publish on our website the criteria and elements adopted by the locality to implement the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Act. We also are required to provide a tax exemption for solar photovoltaic projects of 5 megawatts or less. These are utility grade projects. This is not a couple of solar panels on top of your house. The locality can determine the tax rate for the projects, so you can create a new classification for purposes of taxation with a different rate than the general rate. It can't be greater than the general rate. The exemption is from 80% of the tax for the first 5 years, 70% of the tax for the next 5 years, and 60% after that and through the life of the project. And the bill is mandatory. But we are not a jurisdiction that's likely to get a project like this. A 5 megawatt project requires a minimum of at least 11 acres, And so really the only thing that we have of that size would be institutional property. So our recommendation is that we don't adopt an ordinance for this now. If we get one of these projects, we'll adopt it as part of the approval process for City Council to consider.
So I had a question about the last one. Do we have a plan in place already to respond to the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Act?
I can check with Public Works. So as part of this legislative update, we provide to the department heads everything of relevance to them. And so that has gone out to them. I have not discussed it with them yet, but I'll certainly follow up with them.
Okay, so we potentially would need to develop one, put it on a page on the website. Okay.
There is one more planning bill, House Bill 1088. It permits boundary line adjustments by agreement for purposes of dissolving a dispute without further action of City Council, so long as the adjustment doesn't change, isn't a change of greater than 250 feet from this current platted center line. Doesn't create an additional lot or alter the boundary lines of the locality, result in any grade or street frontage, interfere with a recorded easement, does not result in a nonconformity with local ordinance or health department regulations. It also provides that the court can issue an order from a partition suit, and that will take precedence over our subdivision ordinance as long as it doesn't deviate from the minimum lot width or frontage requirements by more than 20%. So the city code is pretty lenient about resolving disputes for boundary lines. We're pretty easy with respect to that, and we meet that requirement already. But the zoning ordinance will need to require an amendment as a result of the court order portion of this. And so you'll be seeing that again. And the last bill, House Bill 895, requires local boards and general registrars to perform risk-limiting audits. So a risk-limiting audit is a hand count of randomly sampled printed ballot that continues until there is strong statistical evidence that the reported outcome is correct, or in the absence of that, it's a full hand recount. It specifies the elections for which this should be done, but it has to be done at least once every 5 years, and the State Board of Elections is required to provide local electoral boards with procedures for conducting those audits. All right, so that's my last one to present to you.
A question on that last one. What would have required a full hand count?
So you do a sample, and if the sample doesn't indicate that your results are correct based on strong statistical evidence, again, this is not my area of expertise, so the State Board of Elections is going to have to provide specific guidance about what that looks like. You keep going until you get that strong statistical evidence, or you've effectively done an entire hand recount of that election.
Okay, so the idea of what evidence is necessary isn't yet.
It's not there yet. So the statute says strong statistical evidence, and that what constitutes that, and it's a very small margin though, it's like 1%, right? So you can't, but I don't understand all of it in so far as what the State Departments of Election is going to provide in terms of procedures, and so I can follow up with you once we get that, but we don't have that yet.
I would be curious. I just was unclear if that meant strong evidence is to do one of those 5 times, and that would be hours of work, but it sounds like hasn't been decided yet.
Right, you keep going, you start it, and you keep going until you are at that strong statistical evidence standard, or you've ended up doing a full recount of the vote, whichever is first.
Excellent presentation, a lot of good information in there. Appreciate your diligence in staying on top of this for us. This is obviously a small segment of all the bills passed, but I appreciate that you and the VML folks have kind of looked at this and seen what's germane to these types of bodies. So, thank you. Are there any questions for?
No questions. Just thank you for the update and all the time that you put in to make sure and your explanations. Because if we had to read this and interpret ourselves, we would be even more confused.
So we have produced a binder with all of the department's relevant bills. You're welcome to come and look at that at any point.
Oh, exciting. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. I know you're excited to do this every year.
It's a team effort with Joe, so.
Oh, great.
Okay. No other comments, we'll move on. City council communication, any members of council have anything they'd like to share with the public?
Nothing special?
Seeing none, we'll move on. We have on the agenda and published on our website a schedule of meetings that the public may be interested in, ranging from architectural review board meetings to public art council. So I hope you all take the opportunity to look at that and show up and listen and participate if you can. That takes us now to open forum. Anybody like to come forward? Seeing no one, wait, nope, okay. Move on to closed session. Trying to make it dramatic.
I move to go into closed session pursuant to Section 2.2-3711 of the Code of Virginia for the purpose of discussing one personnel matter per subparagraph 1 concerning appointments to boards and commissions, one property matter per subparagraph 3 regarding acquisition of property for workforce housing of which discussion in an open meeting would adversely affect bargaining or negotiation strategy of a public body, and one legal matter per subparagraph 8 for the purpose of consultation on specific legal matters requiring the provision of legal advice by counsel concerning a referendum.
Second?
Mr. Rogers?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Dent?
Aye.
Mr. Maslin?
Aye.
Okay, so we'll go into closed session. We'll take a short break and then we'll come back to conclude the meeting. Thank you very much.